Nailed
it. You are amazing. But you're like, boom, there I am.
Hey.
Hey. So, welcome everybody to Erie Wellness Connect, a heart to heart podcast. Today we have Christine Longnecker here. Yay. My longtime friend. Man, we've known each other for a long time. I don't even know.
Oh, I was literally trying to go back through and figure out like when we even first met. And I can't, like, we've been so intertwined for so many years that I don't even know where it started.
Me, I was thinking about that too. And yeah, and our journeys are very similar.
Yeah.
And we keep intersecting with each other. So it's weird how you have people sometimes in your life like that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's all different aspects too. Like no matter what we're doing, we seem to run into each other. I'm like, oh, Heather, you're doing this too. Oh.
It's that familiar spirit type of life. Like I wonder if we believe in past lives and different things like that, right? Like if we've kind of traveled together throughout the years, you know what I mean?
I do. Oh yeah, I do wonder that.
Yeah. So we have a lot to cover today because you are a woman of many talents and many things. And so we have like 4 different things that I want to review. We're talking about your horsemanship today because that is the start of things for you.
Yeah.
And then traveling into your exploration into your psychic and mediumship abilities, leading to your animal communication. And then I definitely want to talk about your fabulous dog, Miles. Right, Miles.
We're actually, just sidebar, because it's storming out. I had every intention of being in this like beautiful room off the living room that we have that has this great view of the golf course, but it's storming and he's afraid. So instead I'm in my basement hole with him. So.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then of course the happy bark connection that we have. And then kind of figuring out where you're at right now and where you're going, right?
Right. Great question.
So I'll be interested to see how the streaming goes with the thunderstorm outside. So
yeah.
We'll see how it goes. But let's start with the horsemanship, because that's initially, I believe, how I met you, was when I started to dive a little bit deeper into wanting to explore horses. And then I met you, and at that time Stephanie, and we all kind of became friends, and we're all like, oh hey, we like the same things.
Right.
But you started way before that. I mean, you started at a very young age. So let me know, tell us about the start of your journey with that.
Yeah. So it all actually began when I was 5. My whole like childhood, I thought when I grew up, I wanted to be a cat. And turns out, humans can't become cats, although that's a whole nother thing now, I guess. But when I was like, oh, I guess like I can't do cats, I fell in love with horses, and I don't even know how it happened. But when I was 8, my parents gave me the gift of 5 riding lessons. And it's funny because my first 5 riding lessons were actually with Stephanie Sawtell, who, again, we mentioned is a good friend of ours. And my parents always joke that it was the 5 riding lessons that never stop. So my first riding lesson, you like get to the barn and you're so excited. And Steph was like, all right, this is how you groom the horse. This is how you tack up the horse. And we walked to the mounting block and she's like, and now next week we'll get to ride the horse. And so the whole way home, I was sobbing. I was like, that was one of my 5 riding lessons and I didn't even get to get on the horse. And what, like, that's it. And my parents were like, if you love it, we'll make sure we keep doing it. And I always say they probably regretted that because 5 riding lessons that never stopped. So I rode my whole life. And everyone in the horse industry always told me, you can't make money riding horses. So like, go get a career that can afford your horse habit. So I did. I actually have a degree in Intel studies with a minor in religious studies from Mercyhurst, and had every intention of being a profiler for the FBI, working for the government, getting into law enforcement. And I did. I had an internship in DC with Customs and Border Protection. And I hated it. I hated the city. I hated being in the office. I hated like just feeling confined. So I was like, it's okay. It's okay. I'll move home and then I'll be home and that'll be great. And I'll get an office job at home. So I did. And I worked for a private fraud analysis company. And I hated it. I hated being in the office. I hated being constricted to a cubicle. I just spent my whole time looking at the clock, waiting for me to get to the barn. And so finally my family was like, Christine, like an office job is always going to be there. Try the horse thing, right? Like what's worst case scenario? It doesn't work and you can go back to an office job. Right. And so I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And I've not looked back since.
I remember that because I remember we all, I had started my business. It was kind of the same concept, right? And I think we've kind of all grown up together with our businesses. And I remember when you went away, I had even said, I was like, oh, I don't see her doing that at all.
Right. I was like, it's okay. It's going to be able to afford my horse habit. And I remember telling people, I was like, well, sure, I could have made a lot of money working for the government, but all of my money would have gone to therapy. So I wouldn't actually have any money. Instead, I don't need therapy because I have the horses.
Right. So what year did you start your business and what's the name of your business?
Longnecker Equestrian. And I actually started in 2007 when I was 17. Right. I started teaching. There was an overflow of lessons. I had bought a horse, and while I was in school, I was doing it part-time. And I remember having to leave those clients to go to DC, and I was so sad, and I hated every second of it. But I was like, well, guys, I don't know, like, hopefully I'll, I don't know if I'll be back. And I came back. But full time, I started 8 or 9 years ago. So like my business has been around since 2007 and I've been doing it at least part-time since then. But I went full time, I think 8 or 9 years ago.
Okay. All right. So where do you teach at? How does that work?
Everywhere. I don't have my own place. I don't have my own barn. That might be in the plan for someday, if real estate ever calms down. But right now I travel. So I travel to 8 or 9 different barns every week. I have a couple in Fairview, West Springfield, Girard, Cambridge Springs, Edinburgh, Waterford. And I also go to Chagrin Falls, Ohio once a week to teach. So I travel 2 people, and a couple of the barns have horses that they let me use as school horses to teach. So half of my clientele needs a school horse to ride. They don't have their own horse and they want to learn. And then the other half have their own horses. They horse show with me. So depending on what your jam is, depends on where I go and what horse you use.
Okay. All right. So as a client, what kind of clients are you looking for? Like if I'm looking to, well, there's a lot of different stages. Are you looking for beginner type of clients or more advanced? Where are you at now as far as your offerings? What kind of clientele do you have and are you looking for?
Right. I'm given the way the horse industry has changed over the last few years, it's getting harder and harder to find barns that are maintaining school horses. So I teach, like, I say anybody can come take a lesson, but it's getting really hard for me to teach the beginner types because we just in this area don't have a lot of school horses, and the school horses I have are pretty maxed out. Ideally, I'm always looking for the more advanced people who have their own horses, who are interested in doing the horse shows and really furthering their relationship. Because, and I don't know if we'll get into this later, but my big thing is there are so many people who train horses and there are so many people who teach people how to ride. And it's getting better, but in my travels in the horse industry it's very hard to have ethical horsemanship. So people want to ride and show, and the horses are a means to an end. And then there's people who want the horses to have a say. And those people sometimes end up thinking, well, then you can't horse show, or hell, some people think like you can't even ride them. And it's this, I'm trying to bridge the gap where horses, yes, have no interest in doing anything other than eating grass, being fed, and chilling out with each other. I do understand that. But I mean, me too.
Well, I was going to say, as humans, we are too, right?
Give me chocolate and my couch, and I'm perfectly happy.
Yep.
But here we are, and we have to function. So I try to make it my goal with all of my clients to be like, you really have to understand the horse. You have to understand where they're coming from. And then you have to create this partnership in which you guys decide together, like, yeah, we can pursue this. And some horses say no. Some horses absolutely say no. And that's fine. We find them different homes, whatever they need. But I have plenty of horses that absolutely love the game, love to be competitive, have the drive. And we create and foster that relationship in order to go to the horse shows and do the things and be competitive and continue to grow and develop.
You know, that's very interesting. So would you say that you've seen a change in the horse industry over the last 20 years? I mean, I could just imagine, I can just imagine it, just in society itself, right? And then let alone horses, right? Like horses. People don't have horses anymore. We don't use horses for practical means anymore, right? It's so it's interesting. So you have to tailor your business to the trends of where horsemanship is now, right?
Yes. And that's been hard.
Yeah, but I would suspect that it would be more focused toward, right, there's animal rights, there's you know, and we do pay more attention to how animals are feeling. You know, I feel weird saying those things, but
no, I talk to them, so don't feel weird.
So it's interesting to see the trend, and you know, in the amount of people that I know that work with horses, it's much more that now than what it was before. So that leads us to, within all of this, your journey of finding yourself, of not being FBI Christine to being horse Christine. You also started to do some self-exploration of, at some point you noticed that you had some abilities, right?
Yeah.
Tell me what may have had come to you. Was there a specific incident that you were like, I need to start paying attention to this and start exploring this more? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's actually it's a really long story, and I'll try to give you the abridged version. So when I was little, my grandmother died. And she was the first person close to me that had passed away. I was 11. And I started smelling her perfume everywhere I was going. I would see her, I would dream about her. And my family was never like, oh my God, Christine, you're crazy. But they were a little bit like, there. This is the first person that's close to you that you've lost. Like, it's hard. We all deal with it different ways. This is fine. And one I'll never forget, my mom and I were getting ready to go to the barn, and I walked by her while she was putting her shoes on, and she like got up and looked at me, and she was like, why did you put grandma's perfume on? And I was like, I didn't. I've been telling you. Like, I can smell it. I see her. Like, and that was the first time my mom was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
And then, but like life happens, right? Like you grow up, you move on, and it's not that anyone was like, no, that's not real, but we just never really kind of pursued it. And so fast forward, my entire life, I'd been afraid of the dark. I never wanted to be alone, and like, you know, normal kid things, but it was kind of, I don't know, it was different, but I never really thought anything about it. When I was 20, my dad died really suddenly. And I started having this like very weird sensation in my hands. And I was talking to a few people about it. And I don't even remember who it was like, oh, you should pursue energy healing. And who do I go to but you, right? I'm like, hey, Heather, I need to pursue energy healing. So you were my Reiki 1 and Reiki 2 teacher.
Oh my God, I totally forgot that. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. Now it's coming back to me. Wow. But that's how
interconnected we've always been.
Right.
So I came because we had done the horse thing together for a little while, and then life happened, and then I came back to you for the Reiki 1 and Reiki 2.
Yes.
That was super, and then somehow that transitioned into Jen Shepherd of Bolts of Love.
Yep.
I think I redid Reiki 1 and Reiki 2 and did Reiki 3 with her.
Yes.
And at some point you were in the classes too, like it was all together. Yep. And during that energy healing time, I kept feeling like, I kept saying like, I feel like somebody's always behind me, right? Like back to that, like afraid of the dark situation. Like somebody's always behind me. I keep looking like there's somebody there and they're not. And then that transitioned into mediumship classes, where all of a sudden I was like, oh, like it's the dead people. Like they're back there. So I started doing the mediumship classes and doing circles and pursuing that. And in the process of doing that, during the circles where you're supposed to be, communicating with people's past loved ones, I started communicating with people's past pets. And I was like, well, this is interesting because like now I'm known as like the girl that communicates with the pets instead of the people.
I kind of remember that. Remember that. Yes.
We would do circles together, and it was the online, the virtual circles. And
yes.
And I would be like, do you have an orange cat in spirit? And then one day, literally, I walked in the barn and a horse looked at me and started talking. And I was like, oh, here we are.
There it is. There it is. That's my life now. I talk to animals.
Yep. Like, check. Okay. It's been a really long circle to get here, but it makes sense now.
Wow. Yeah. That is amazing. And it makes so much sense though. You know what I mean? Like looking back and now where you're at, you're like, oh yeah, duh.
Right. In the thick of things, I was like, what am I doing? Right. Like you feel like you're sitting and you're like, I don't know which way's up and which way's down, but I just keep like going to the thing that seems to work. And now like looking back at the whole picture, I'm like, oh, well, this whole journey's made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. So tell me and tell the audience, how does an animal talk to you? Like, what is your sense? Like, you don't actually see their lips moving, or do you see their lips moving? Like, is it like the cartoons, or how do you get that information from them?
Right. And I've actually been doing almost everything remotely because it was really during COVID that this whole animal communication thing kind of took off for me because, as a business owner, you try to adapt and continue to function. And during COVID was pretty hard. So I started offering remote animal communications because all I need, and it's wild. And listen, I have so many people who are like, do you really talk to animals? Like, dude, I'm also the kind of person who's super skeptical and do not believe things unless like they're shoved in my face. And the stuff I get from this is wild. Like anybody who's done a communication with me will be like, oh yeah, the stuff she gets, like it's bananas. Cause I'm sitting on my couch and I have a picture of your animal and the name, and we're talking on the phone, and I'm able to connect with them and give you stuff that is absolutely bananas that I should not know. I don't know you. I don't know your animal. So the way they communicate, I always say it's like this very strange game of Pictionary. So they'll send me words and phrases. I'll get images. I'll feel things in my body. And then I have to try to put all that together and articulate it in a coherent sentence. So it's far from an exact science, but the more I do it and the more I understand, and I always ask people for feedback. When I say something, I'm like, all right, like I'm getting this picture and I'm getting this feeling, and I give it to them, and they either like absolutely understand it, or if they don't, I'm like, all right, well, come back to me in a week, and did you understand it, or did I need to feel into something a little differently?
Right, right. Yeah. So are you talking to animals that are currently here, or are you talking to animals from beyond?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, it's interesting because it works the same. But animals also, I tell people all the time, like, space and time is kind of a human construct, right? Like, animals don't see it the way we do. So they don't, I can communicate with them from my couch if they're in California, or I can communicate with them from my couch if they've passed on. Like, they have this, just like, you can communicate with people who have passed on. Space and time are, I think in the next 50 years, we're going to learn a whole lot more about the fact that even though science hasn't caught up yet, there's a whole lot we don't know.
For sure, for sure. What brings your clientele to you? What makes somebody go, I want to talk to my dog Rosie, and I'm going to call Christine to see if she can help me? What is a common theme amongst your clients?
The majority come to me because they're having an issue. Like so my dogs aren't getting along, or I just brought a new dog home and my cat's upset, or my performance horse is not performing well. I feel like there's something going on, right? It's this people who have animals, for the most part, are intuitive enough to know when something's not quite right or not sitting right. And it's this, I know something's not right, but I can't put a finger on it. And so they come to me to help kind of bridge that gap, where they know something's going on and they want me to kind of help get to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm. So behavioral issues.
Yeah, and there are some people, like, I think it's fun. There are some people who are like, I just think this is neat and I have no issues, but like, let's talk to my animal, and we have a really hysterical, fun time just chatting with their animals and just finding out what they have to say.
Okay. All right. All right. That does actually sound like fun. I'd love to find out a little bit more about what Miss Rosie has to say
Right?
about
It's just
you.
a good time.
Interesting. What does a session look like? Like how long is it? What, and like you said, you could do it over Zoom. Could you do them in person?
I not usually, because my schedule's so insane. Because
It's not like you go all over the place. So
right, yeah, I'm traveling constantly. I teach like 40 lessons a week. Plus then we're in horse show season. So my life is so insane that normally the communications I don't do in person. We schedule a time over the phone. That's just it works much easier.
okay.
But I always, so like, one animal is usually like 30, 45 minutes, depending on how chatty they are, depending on what questions you have. Two animals in a communication is somewhere between like 45 minutes and an hour. But it seriously depends on, like, some animals are chattier than others. Some people have more questions than others. So I give them kind of like a rough estimate, and we kind of go from there and see what all the animal has to say.
Uh-huh. Now, from your business of riding horses or teaching people how to ride, the horsemanship, to this, do you bridge the two together sometimes? Or do you just intuitively, maybe in the one realm, listen to the horse, but maybe not always tell the people about what the horse is saying? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get better. It's one of my goals is, there's Christine's brain and there's Christine's gut and intuition. And I'm really good at using the intuition part when I'm doing the communications, and my whole life, right, has been using my brain for my business, and bridging the gap between the two is really important to me. And it's something I'm constantly struggling with and trying to get better with. So there was a time where my answer was, I cannot communicate with my own animals, and I cannot communicate with my clients' animals, because my brain would get in the way, right? There's a completely different part of you that has to do the mediumship, the animal communication, that sort of thing. Like, you have to get out of, I always say you have to get out of your own way. And my whole life, I've been very bad at getting out of my own way. So this is no different. But I want, the more I flex that intuitive gut muscle, the stronger it gets, and the more I'm able to incorporate it into my business. So if I can't, I have a couple friends who also do animal communication, that I lean on, and I'm like, oh, I'm having a lot of trouble with this one horse, or, Miles is trying to tell me something and I just can't quite get to it. And I lean on them because they're awesome. But the more I am able to kind of take a breath and bridge, yes, like, and my whole life, I think that's part of the reason I've been so successful, right? Is I am intuitive without even really thinking about it. That's actually worse when I think about it. So the less I think about it, the more intuitive I am. And I always say, I have a really good track record at when a client's like, okay, it's time for me to buy a horse, right? Then we have to go horse shopping. And I have a really good track record at being able to match horses and riders.
Okay.
And just like my business of like, I put you on a school horse. And the more I think about that, the more it's absolutely because of my intuition and my ability to know what that horse is feeling or doing or saying, and what the person needs, and that ability to kind of bring them both together.
You know what, Chris, real quick, I think this is a good lead in, though, to your own intuition, to your own animal that you have right now. I want to move into Miles and the story of that, because I think that brings us to that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you're good at hooking up animals, your clients, to their own horses, but I want to hear what brought you, how you got to the dog that you have today, because I think this is a fabulous story, because it all ties in together, right?
Yeah. And it was actually one of the first times. So I've had him for 5 years. And so it was around the time where like I was developing all of this, but certainly not like having it as a business or any of that. Like, I knew I could kind of do it, but I had no control over it, and the muscles had not been flexed super well. And I was at the point where I really wanted my own dog. Like, we had family dogs growing up, and it had been a few years without a dog, and I really wanted my own dog, and I knew I was going to do the horse. I was already doing the horse thing full time, knew I was never going back to an office. So I'm like, oh, I could have a dog and it could travel with me and it would be super fun. So I started, applying to the local rescues and kind of looking at dogs. And there were a couple dogs that Because You Care that I was interested in. And so I went to the shelter, and we were walking by the kennels to go to the dogs that I was interested in. And this little black and tan thing was sitting at the front of the kennel, and I went to walk by, and I kind of stopped, and I looked back, and he just sat at the front of the kennel, looked directly into my soul. Like, for those of you who have not looked at, an animal has not looked in your soul, I cannot describe it to you, but when it happens, you will know. He literally looked into my soul, and I heard, as plain as day, I just want to be a good boy. And I was like, my heart is shattered. That one, like, I didn't even know he existed. He was not one of the ones I was going to look at. And I was like, that one, like, I want that one. And they're like, no, you don't. He had been brought back multiple times. They said that he was aggressive. He couldn't be around kids. He couldn't be around other animals. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do that. Like, he was basically starting to get the label of like unadoptable. And I was like, no, like, I want him. And since the day I got him, he's not been unadoptable ever. He goes to all the barns with me. He plays with the dogs. My 16-year-old cat, the day I brought him home, beat him into a corner, and he just cowered and was like, okay, I'm sorry. And it is, he just wanted to be a good boy, but nobody really understood what that meant for him. And I feel like I was able to hear him and say, okay, like, let's do it.
I love that story. It makes me tear up every time. I think it's just, yeah. And to see you guys together, the relationship and the bond, is just phenomenal to watch and to watch it grow. I love watching you guys. So tell us what you do with Miles, and how that relationship has grown.
Yeah. So when I got him, originally it was kind of like, oh, I just like want a companion and he can go to the barn and be like my sidekick. And he's incredibly good at that. If you ask him, he owns my business. I just have the thumbs and the legs to drive him places, but he's the coach. Like, all of my clients know that he's Coach Miles. He's the one that's in charge. Like, if he doesn't come, they're very depressed because they're like, what, Coach Miles doesn't love me today?
Right.
And so I've obviously ridden horses my whole life. I've jumped horses. I love that, like, bond with an animal to do competitive things and do it ethically. And while like Miles and I were getting to know each other and he was at the barn, he was just like starting to run around and jump the horse jumps and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is actually like kind of cool. Like, I've always heard about dog agility. I had a few friends who did agility. So I was like, we should look into classes. And so I joined a class at Countryside Agility on 38th Street in Erie. And they call it your novice A dog. So your first agility dog is your novice A dog. He's my novice A dog. We went from literally knowing absolutely nothing and me taking this unadoptable rescue mutt versus like, all these purebreds that are bred for agility. And he went from learning how to jump a jump in the correct order to now he's got his master agility championship title. He was the #1 All-American dog at nationals in Ocala, Florida 2 years ago. Wow. We just recently at the beginning of May went to the Westminster Dog Show, which I think is hysterical because like it's all these purebred dogs, but they do agility. And he was the #3 All-American dog in his height class at Westminster. Like he's absolutely incredible. And every time he's on the course, like I will have people come up to me that are like, he's insane. Like you can tell he loves it. And there are like plenty of dogs love it, right? Like that's why we do it. But he's just like so stinking happy up there. He's got such a fan club everywhere. Fan club in the horse world, fan club in the agility world. Like it's hysterical.
You know what it is, though? It's because of his love for you. He wants nothing more than to be that good boy for you.
Oh, yeah. Anything we can do together. And he's always like, he goes just about everywhere with me. And it's always like, if he's unsure or he always just gives me that face. Like he's so good at looking into my soul and being like, what's next?
Oh, I love it. I love watching you guys' journey together. It's a testament to taking the time to listen and to figure out their communication, their language, and bridging that bond together, between animal and human.
Well, and you don't always get the answer you want either. Sidebar. So my horse, I
know you've had your struggles.
Yeah. I bought, I'm really good at matching horses with clients, and I'm really good at finding horses for myself that need help, apparently, that don't do what I want them to do, but they need me. I don't even know how many years ago. He's 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I was looking for a horse and I found this absolutely wonderful young 3-year-old thoroughbred that was just fabulous. His name was Meatball. Like, what's not to love, right? He's just like big and chunky and talented. And he and I struggled so much. And my whole time with him, I'm thinking like there's something going on. Like I don't know what it is, but I always chalked it up to like he's still so young, he's still growing, he's still developing, he's still trying to come into his own. He's this, he's that. where everyone else's young horses were going and competing and moving up the levels, like I'm still struggling to get mine to do the simplest things. And I'm like, it's okay. Like he's just developing. Well, 2-3 years ago, he got kicked out in the pasture, and it killed a piece of his bone and it above his knee. And it was, horrible, but they're like, oh, don't worry. It's like a super simple surgery. We just have to remove that dead piece of bone. He'll be good as new in a couple months. Not a big deal. And I'm like, okay, great. And then we can, then we can start on our career because this will be the last hurdle to accomplish. He did the surgery, wouldn't heal, wouldn't get rid of the infection. The price of a new car later, we discovered that he has an autoimmune disorder and he can't heal from things. And which makes sense because he was always getting injured and it was always taking so long to heal anything. So I'm like, oh God, autoimmune disorder, but that's okay. Now I know, right? Now I know autoimmune disorder, not a big deal. We can recover. I can take precautions. I can put him on supplements. It's all fine. So I start to bring him back, from this injury. He's awful, screaming at me that something is so terribly wrong, right? Like, and he's never been comfortable and he's worse forever. So I finally, I'd spent the years being, in this part of my brain and not the intuitive part of my brain. The intuitive part of my brain knew something was going on, but the brain part of my horse trainer side was like, he just needs to grow up. He just needs to develop. He's going to be fine. And I finally was
when you're close with something though, it's different. When
exactly.
It's yours, it's totally different.
Yeah, you can't get out of your own way. Yeah, I can help my clients all the time, right? But my own self, it's hard. So yeah, I finally was like, well, this is not working. The brain's not working. Let's go with the intuitive side. And I was like, we're figuring out what's wrong. Well, it turns out he has kissing spine and neck arthritis. So for people who aren't horse people, basically the vertebrae in his back come together and rub. So where you sit on the horse, his vertebrae are rubbing. And in a lot of horses, you can inject with steroids, you can do a surgery, you can help them develop correctly. Now, this horse had been being ridden correctly since he was, a 3-year-old. He came off the track and was sourced by somebody who knew what she was doing. And I found him and I hope I know what I'm doing. So he was always ridden correctly. That wasn't doing it. We tried the steroid injections. They didn't even touch him. And it was so bad as a 7-year-old who hadn't done anything. Like he already had bone remodeling. And then we x-rayed his neck and it was he's got neck arthritis and he's 7. And so this whole time he was screaming at me that something was wrong. And if I had just gone with my gut when he was 4, we probably wouldn't have gone through this whole rigmarole. So the point of the story is they can work out great, like in the Cinderella story that is my dog Miles, right? Like he just wanted to be a good boy. I have taken him. We've done amazing things. He's got a fan club. It's the greatest feeling in the world. But there's also the story of it doesn't always work. And the price of a new car later, my horse is retired in my friend's pasture because he screamed at me that he couldn't, and I couldn't hear him for a while. And then when I finally did, I did exactly what was right by him. And I said, you're right. You can't. This isn't fair. And now he's the happiest thing in the entire world.
Well, Christine, I think that's a testament, though, also to where somebody like you from the outside may be able to help somebody who's struggling with their own horse or their own animal, right? You were too close to the situation to be able to maybe see or hear what needed to be heard, right? So that's where you may come in with somebody else who is struggling with their own horse, right? You may be able to hear something that they're not.
Well, and I've had a few people and it's not every time, right? Because not every animal is as intuitive, just like people, right? But I've had a few animals who, like a friend of mine was struggling with her horse, and we did a communication, and he's like, X-ray here. I need you to X-ray here. And when we did, we found the issue, and she was able to help him. And I've had other horses that were, not performing super well, and they were like, oh, well, it's my shoulder and we need to do something and adjust it, and then they're better, right? So I have been able, and I love that. And I think my own experience has helped me be a better communicator because I can say, I've been here, I've done that, like, let me help you. And I have had multiple people who come back to me and they're like, I didn't want you to be right, but you were. Like, thank you so much, because it made me pursue an issue I wouldn't have even thought of.
That's awesome. So question here is, where do you see this going? Because I really feel like within the past, I mean, I've been seeing you put it out there more and more as far as the animal communication and stuff. Where do you see this going? Do you see yourself doing this more than the horse? Where do you see your future in all of this,
Well,
in all of your careers?
isn't that the $1 million question?
Right.
You know, and it's always what life's what happens when you're busy making plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. You have your ideal, and then you have what happens, right? Like, remember, I'm supposed to be a profiler for the FBI.
Right, right.
I can't give up horses, right? Like they're what got me started. They've been there the whole time. Like, I absolutely love it. I have a fantastic group of clientele that I absolutely adore. Like, the horses will always be a part of it. I most definitely want to expand the animal communication because it's so amazing, and I haven't had a bad experience yet, and it just brings animals and people closer together, and I just absolutely love it. So I want to continue to expand that. I will always do the horse thing, and I think the big goal, like, no matter what, right, whether the path goes here or here or here or wherever it goes, I want to continue to develop that gap between my brain and my intuition and my gut. And so I want to get to a really, and I'm always authentic, right? What you see is what you get.
Right.
But I want to get to a point where I don't feel like I'm like, hold on, let me use this side of my brain. Hold on, let me use this side of my brain. Like, I want to get to a point where they're both together and I can just be incredibly authentic and in the moment with the animal communication, the horses, the whatever it is, wherever that kind of develops.
I think you're definitely on the right path. And like I said, I see you putting it out there more and more. And I think it's just going to eventually, you know, whatever you're doing more at any time, it's just all going to kind of flow together. And I think you're really starting to get that groove on. And I love seeing that, especially since we've been in and out of each other's lives for so much. It's just really cool to see you come into yourself that way.
Right. Right. Oh, same for you. It's been a fun adventure of like us just kind of like floating through space trying to figure it out. And now I feel like we're both like, oh, here's our path.
Yep. Yep, exactly. Oh, this is awesome. So thank you so much, Christine, for coming on today. Afterwards, we will put Christine's information down below on the Facebook page of how anybody can get a hold of you, perhaps for a reading. And maybe,
Absolutely.
yeah, and then we'll keep that together. Christine, I want you to stay right there. I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you for everybody tuning in today. And thank you so much for coming. Thanks.